Grüß willkommen in einem frequent video. Welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case part 22 of my battle series of videos. In this case I'll be covering the Battle of Nihriya. This video is mainly focused on looking at the battle from a figure gaming point of view, or at least to provide value to a figure gamer, which means that it includes order of battle, troop types and the flow of the battle. Things like why the battle was fought is certainly not the main focus of this video. When the Hittite king Suppiluliuma conquered Mitanni, he created two provinces for the Hittite Empire and distributed a large part of the conquered territories of this kingdom between his allies. The rest of what had been the Empire of Mitanni retained its independence as a Hittite vassal state called Hanig al-Bat. During the reign of the Hittite king Mursali III, Hanig al-Bat was conquered by the Assyrian Empire, and the Assyrians controlled the east bank of the Euphrates. When Hattusili III ousted his nephew Irr Ax and seized the Hittite throne, he had to contend with the permanent loss of Hanig al-Bat to the Assyrians, despite its former status as a Hittite vassal state. The Assyrian involvement in Syria continued under the command of King Sulmanu Asared I and precipitated a crisis with Hittite. The Hittites considered Assyrian involvement to be a clear attack on the frontiers of their empire and went into battle under their king, Tudhadiyah, Hattusili's son and successor. This led to a major battle which is known today as the Battle of Nihriya. A letter, which is referenced RS 34.265, gives details of this campaign and its outcome, and this was sent by the king of Assyria, Sulmanu Asared, to Ugarit. In addition to that reference, information within a Hittite document, reference KBO 4114, has been interpreted to show that the battle must have occurred around the 20th year of Sulmanu Asared's reign, which was the Assyrian king. We know the battle occurred in the neighbourhood of Nihriya, which I have to assume is a town of some description. This no longer exists, and we are uncertain of its exact locations, although scholars have provided a rough idea of where it may have been located. Let's now drill down into the Assyrian army. Sulmanu Asared I commanded the Assyrian army, we assume, during this battle. The Assyrians in this period were on the rise, so it's assumed that their army was well structured, well commanded, and highly experienced. There is only one reference which provides an idea of the size of the two armies. The Assyrians claim to have captured 28,000 Hittites at this battle. Most historians feel the actual number of troops would have been much lower, and as the Hittites mustered an army of about 25,000 men at Kadesh in 1274 BC, it's reasonable to assume this may have represented the full size of the Hittite army with allies and subject or vassal forces. As the Assyrians won, they may have fielded as many as 30,000 men, with possibly 5,000 to 6,000 chariots included in that number. These values are very high for the period and do represent a maximum number. The actual troop numbers may well have been much less than this. There is no estimates or idea of the number of chariots fielded by the Assyrians. A reasonable maximum is probably 5,000 to 6,000 chariots. The total number of foot probably numbered no more than 20,000 men. Let's look at the Assyrian chariots, or as the DBMM army list calls them, the shepe and palace chariots. They were 2-horse, 2-crew chariots, and a possible number was 5,000 to 6,000. I find the type of chariot rather unusual, as I always visualise the Assyrians having very large chariots. This data comes from the DBMM army list, but upon research I feel that it's probably correct. The Assyrian 4-horse chariots were probably fielded much later than this battle. As with most armies of the period, a very low number of troops would have been mounted on horses without a saddle. This troop type would have not had much impact during the battle, but would have been very useful in terms of scouting. The elite Assyrian foot were armed with a shield, an axe, and some would have also had spears. They were well trained, armed and experienced, and this would have been the main infantry shot force of the Assyrian army. It's possible up to 3,000 to 4,000 of this troop type were deployed in this battle. Supporting the elite foot were bow-armed foot. There may have also been between 3,000 to 4,000 of this troop type available during the battle. The bulk of the army would have been the militia, or at least what the DBMM army list calls militia. These would have been armed with shield, spear and javelin, capable of melee and skirmish combat. Supporting the militia foot, or the spear-armed foot, were skirmish archers. That troop type and the javelin-armed militia would have comprised the bulk of the army, perhaps a total of 8,000 men, half of each. The Assyrians would have also possessed javelin-armed skirmishers, possibly numbering 2,000 if the DBMM army list is reasonably correct. Let's now drill down into the Hittite army. On the Hittite side, Tutalia commanded, or Tutalia IV, which was the king of the Hittite Empire, commanded the army. Well, we assume he commanded the army in this battle. We have no idea of the size of the Hittite army, but based on guesswork and some numbers from an Assyrian letter, 28,000 to 30,000 men may be a reasonable maximum. We have no idea how many chariots were actually fielded, but if we look at other battles where they did field chariots, 4,000 to 5,000 may be reasonable. These were 3 crew chariots and consisting of a spearman and a javelinmen. The total Hittite army foot probably comprised about 15,000. The elite forces in the Hittite army were the Hittite chariots, which were 3 crew chariots. The Hittite chariots were most likely permanent military formations and gave the Hittites a clear advantage against the 2 crew chariots of the Assyrians, at least in direct melee combat. This was a very large army, and the Hittites no doubt raised all their allies and all their subject vassals. So supporting the Hittite chariots, and of course their close allies, were the vassal chariots, which were also 3 crew chariots. There may have been some 2 crew chariots mixed in there, although we can also assume that the quality of this chariot would have been lower than the actual core Hittite chariots. I lack an image of a Hittite mounted scouts, but the Hittites would have had a very small number of these type of troop types. Again, during this battle, I would assume that these troop types were not really involved. The Hittite elite infantry were their standing army, which were armed with axes and long spears. These troops, at least according to the DBMM army lists, were highly effective and reasonably unique, although faced with the experienced axe-wielding Assyrian foot, they may have actually met their match. Supporting the regular Hittite infantry were the Hittite conscripts, which were not well trained or armed. It's unlikely many of these troop types would have been present in this battle, as this would have represented a militia that probably would have only been raised if Hittite itself was threatened. Almost certainly a large part of the army would have consisted of vassal, spearmen and javelinmen armed with a spear and shield. Supporting the vassal spearmen would have been the vassal archers, which were armed with a bow and fighting as skirmishers or in close order with the spearmen. Finally, there would have been a reasonable number of subject and allied skirmish troops armed with spears and fighting as skirmishers or with a shield and capable of melee combat. We don't really have any good information on the exact location of this battle and its flow. One guess is it was fought close to the modern village or town of Konkulio. Perhaps the city of Nihriya was close to this location. The land around this small town is reasonably flat and wide, so would be suitable for chariots. To the north and south would have been rough terrain, but this flat valley was very wide, allowing free use of the chariots. This probably gave the Assyrian light chariots a significant advantage. Unlike my other videos, we really don't know very much about this battle. However, there are some interesting data points that we can list. The information that we do have can be summarised as following. First is, the Assyrians claimed to have captured 28,000 Hittites, which, if accurate, would have made each army well in excess of 35,000 men each. This is very unlikely, so perhaps represents the upper size limit of the Hittite army, although this could have still been exaggerated nonetheless. As the Assyrians won, they would have possessed a similar, if not greater, number of troops. We know the Hittite king survived the battle and managed to suppress a number of revolts in the Hittite kingdom after the battle. This tells me the Hittites lost the battles, but a sizable portion of the army would have escaped, perhaps all the chariots. The news of the defeat caused the revolts, and the Hittite king spent years suppressing these revolts. We also know the war between the Assyrians and Hittite lasted for another 5 years, after which a peace treaty was signed. The Assyrians did not take all of the old Mitanni lands, but did take a sizable portion. I can assume while the Hittites were involved with suppressing their revolts, the Assyrians took city after city, but by the 4th or 5th year the Hittites returned, or the Hittite main army returned, and some form of stalemate occurred, resulting in a peace treaty. Based on this incredibly minimalistic information, I have to assume the battle was hard fought, with the Hittites being forced to withdraw. Apart from this guess, we have no idea of the flow of the battle, and I'm not going to make any guesses as I simply lack anything to base those guesses on. And so we come to a close of this rather scanty in terms of data video, part 22 of my military history series of videos covering the Battle of Nihriya. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.